Yo, what up, dude? The name's Champ Pinkleton. I'm the 80s guy, that stereotypical 80s guy. I mean, look at my collar. Look how big it is. That shows how important I am, and that I'm really a bully. So you better check yourself, or I'm gonna go to your ski resort and shut down your rec center, like all the other 80s movies. So let me drop a little bit of knowledge about this movie. Well, there's obviously vampire movies in the 80s. There were not that many compared to like the late 2000s. That was the vampire craze. That just went way over the top. I mean, seriously, there's vampire movies coming out every damn week, if not more than one. But there were some really great vampire movies in the 80s. Once Bitten, The Hunger, Lost Boys, and so forth. However, the 80s brought around the comedy horror theme, and many of the vampire movies back then fell into this category. So today I'm going to talk about this little hidden gem that not many people I know knew about this movie. Now maybe you have heard about it, maybe you haven't, maybe you have friends who've known about it and talked about it before, but I kind of doubt it. And that's because there were so many big movies that came out around about the same time. It kind of got overshadowed. Anyway, the movie I'm talking about is just called Vamp. V-A-M-P, short for vampire, of course. So, let me know if you've seen this one before. Put that in the comments. So like I said, it's more like a comedy and horror, and it's full of 80s cheese, stereotypical characters and scenes, but there's a certain amount of charm to it. It is cheesy, but it's cheesy in just the right way. It doesn't really have any really big name actors in it. It's got Chris Makepeace, Sandy Barron, Robert Rulsa, Geddy Watanabe, which maybe you've heard that name before because he was actually in a few other 80s movies, always playing the stereotypical Asian guy, although he played several different, Asian races. So, unfortunately, that was the 80s back then. They weren't very focused on, hey, you look Asian, so you could play any Asian role. And Robert Rusler. Now, the last name you might know. He was in Weird Science and Nightmare on Elm Street 2. It's two pretty big movies in the 80s. But all of them really did not survive past the 80s. It's like as soon as it went over to 1990, they just vanished into thin air. Maybe they were really vampires, and 1990 had a lot more sun, and they all died. I'm not too sure. Maybe there was a surplus of wooden stakes, and there's a lorry that tipped over and they all went flying, and happened to hit all of them in the heart. I'm not 100% sure, but yeah, you didn't really see anything from them after that. Maybe a couple of background roles here and there. However, there was one big name attached to this movie, and that was Grace Jones, which is weird. And weirder yet was this scene. So I'm going to let you look at this picture. Yeah, she's doing whiteface, right? Yeah, kind of strange. But even stranger for that was that she looked like a zebra later on. And I'll show you a picture later on what I mean by that. So the synopsis for this movie is quite simple. But it does sound a bit like a Meatballs movie, if you ever watched any of the Meatball movies. Which makes sense because two of the cast members in this movie were in the original Meatball movie as well. So anyway, here's the story. Two college students, Keith and AJ, want to join a frat house to help with the connections. So they promise that they're going to bring some strippers. They do not have a car, so they have to bring Duncan, who has a car, who at this point is just so desperate to have friends, he says, okay, I'll give you the car for free. So the three of them go off to find a stripper. And this is where they find Grace Jones doing this weird dance. Where, like I said before, she looks more like a zebra. Yeah, you heard me. A zebra. Just look at the picture. Zebra Jones in whiteface. Who would ever thought of that? Anyway, it turns out she's a vampire. AJ gets bit, but he makes a promise to protect his friend and goes against the other vampires. They find themselves trapped in this vampire town because everybody there is a vampire. And then they're joined by this random mysterious girl. It's kind of simple, but that can be the fun in some movies. I'm sorry in advance, but I'm going to go on a little bit of a rant here. I feel like in the last 10 years or so, or thereabouts, some movies try to be complicated. They try to be convoluted. They want to be complicated just to be complicated. Like, they have some type of complex storyline that's going to make the movie better somehow. But sometimes this is not the case. In many cases, actually, it ruins the movie. They become so convoluted that either the average viewer cannot follow the story, or they make so many plot hole mistakes in the movie by making it so complicated, it tears itself a new asshole. I mean, look, you can make a complex movie, have good acting, and the whole thing will work, even if there's a couple of mistakes here and there. Great, do it. But if you want to make a movie complex just to make it complex, and the acting's bad, and you try to cover up the problem with the storyline, the script writing, and the acting with some type of want-to-be complex storyline, it's like a band-aid. It's really, it's going to be a band-aid when you cut off your arm. It's really going to stop nothing, isn't it? Just keep it simple. Just keep on the plot. Keep the focus on the rest of the stuff, Have some good scripts, have some good acting, have just a solid storyline. It doesn't always have to be overcomplicated. And I'm tired of freaking movies doing this. Just keep it simple sometimes. Stop ruining your own movies by saying, well, this is going to be complex and this is going to totally shock the audience. Well, guess what? 9 out of 10 times we guess what's going to happen already. So you're really not doing anything new, are you? Stop doing this. Go back to what works sometimes. I mean, seriously, some of these movies are more convoluted than a piece of crap that I took this morning that's infested with convoluted corn in it. Rant over. The point is, though, that this movie did what they did. It was simple, cheesy, and quite mono, honestly, but it works, and it works well. Sure, some of the jokes are outdated, and this is more of a victim of its own time than anything else. But it has some genuinely funny moments, and a few little creepy and scary moments too. In many ways, this movie reminds me of something like Fright Night. Nudge, nudge, perhaps that's a spoiler for later. In terms of how they did the comedy, the styling, one friend turns into a vampire, and that was, done in a lot of movies. However, there's one part that was kind of unique for the time in this movie, and it kind of makes fun of other vampire movies. In a bit of a way, it's kind of a precursor to Scream. Scream always made fun of their own horror movies. Wes Craven was very good at that. But there's a certain line here, it's see, I can't see myself in the mirror. Just like one of those horror movies. So it's kind of a loose connection, but I do see it. There are some references and jokes about other horror movies, especially other vampire movies. One other thing that's a little different first time as well is that AJ, the bitten one, wants to die rather than live as a vampire. And I thought this was kind of a unique view at the time. Most vampire movies back then was either a full comedy, slapstick kind of comedy, or, it's full horror and they just wanted to eat your face and drink your blood. But this one, it kind of started to show, can't really say remorse, but, he's understood what it means to be a vampire, that he wants to kill his best friend, and he doesn't want to live that way. Like I said, it's more of a comedy, it's not really a serious movie, but they bring up an interesting point, and this was, like I said, pretty early on in the years in horror movies to do this. So I find that quite a few other movies did follow that as well. Of course, a lot of these vampire movies come from the old books and the older movies as well. But it was really interesting to see that. Now, there's one really weird scene that I really actually loved, and it's kind of really surreal. It almost felt like Twin Peaks part of the movie. So they're in this bar, and they're talking to the owner, who's a vampire, and he just told them that, we're going to kill you. Basically, you're not getting out of this alive, you're going to die. And, you know, the kid kind of takes this in stride and orders some drinks. But in the background, there's like this mellow jazz music going on. And there's all these people, or vampires, or maybe a mix of both, drinking and talking like this is just a normal thing. And then there's these weird camera angles where you're looking from really low down to the heads of the actors. And they kind of looked a bit warped and distorted because of where they have the camera angle. It's really weird, but it works really well. And like I said, I love Twin Peaks, and it had this Twin Peaks feel to it. And it was out of nowhere. I mean, just in the middle of the movie, they just throw this in. And it just doesn't fit the rest of the movie, but it works well enough that it is part of the movie. It's not one of those things where they just suddenly jump to a completely different feel of a movie and it doesn't work. They slide it in very, very well. And then at the same time, there's this great line. It's like, the boy's like, at first like, hey, call the police! These guys are vampires! And there's some guy in the background who's like, well, it doesn't mean that they're bad people. I mean, they're giving me drinks, aren't they? They just shout out in the background. I just found that moment completely hilarious. And then finally, the mysterious woman reveals her true identity. At first, I thought this was kind of stupid, but the silliness kind of makes sense and it goes well with the movie. It turns out that she was an old friend from high school, but it's the way she portrays herself and the way she says, like, oh, you know, I'm Tracy from high school, don't you remember me? Right in the middle when they're being chased by vampires, like nothing's happening. Look, to this point, if you're going expecting this movie to be serious, you're going to be disappointed. Now, if you're going in to watch this movie to see it for what it really is, I think you'll really enjoy it. In other ways, it kind of reminds me of Big Trouble in Little China. And that's nothing but a good thing, seeing that it's one of my all-time favourite movies ever made. John Carpenter is the man. Kurt Russell is awesome. Now, it's not quite up to that caliber, but it does have that kind of feel to it. And it's just, part of it I think is the soundtrack. The soundtrack on this movie does remind me of Big Trouble in Little China. But it's also like the one-liners, the weirdness that happens in this movie. That, you know, people are just accepting things at face value that's going on. And in other ways, it also reminds me a bit from Dusk Till Dawn. In this case, yeah, you know that it's already vampires. But the movie does change a lot where you're kind of like, what the hell? Kind of like when you first felt when you saw from Dusk Till Dawn. Look, if you want gory, all-out thriller action, then don't watch this. But if you want some good vampire comedy with a few creepy and weird moments, then definitely watch it. This movie flows pretty well. There's no real slow or low points in the movie, which makes it really enjoyable to watch. There's no really great high moments in the movie. There's a couple of bits here and there, but overall the flow does really well in this movie. It just makes you want to keep on watching it. And honestly, I was felt a bit disappointed when the movie's over. I wanted to see more of it. Towards the end, when one of the vampires dies, this one scene is so bad, it's so cheesy, but it's so great. Basically, the vampire flips them the bird when they're bones. I don't know how they could do that, but it's funny. So, that about wraps it up. Look, I thought this movie's really good for anyone who wants to take a break from the jump scares or the gore, and someone who just wants, like, a monster movie that's maybe a little bit dark, but also some slapstick comedy in there thrown in. And look, if you want to see Grace Jones look like a stripping zebra, you're going to enjoy the movie. Now, she actually never talks in this movie, and apparently that was her idea. She went up to the director and said, look, I don't think I should talk in this movie. And I think she was right. I think it perfectly fit. The fact that she was silent actually made her probably the most creepy one in this whole movie. I thought it worked really well. Look, this is kind of a farcical of an 80s movie, but it's a lot of fun. Just when you're watching it, don't go in there with high expectations. Don't go in there thinking it's going to be really scary. Don't go in there thinking that it's going to have a lot of gore like a normal vampire movie. Just go out and enjoy. Well, peace out. I'm in need for a snack now.